Happy Friday, beer runners, and welcome to another edition of the iRunOnBeer Friday 5. You may remember a few months ago I did a video for the Friday 5 called My First Ultramarathon, What Have I Done? Where I basically went through all of my fears, concerns, and unknowns going into signing up for my first ultramarathon. So if you watch that video, then you'll remember I am officially registered for the Bandera 100K in Texas. The marathon is the longest distance I've ever run up until this point, and that was on road, so this will not only be the longest trail run by far that I've ever done, but also obviously the longest race that I've ever run in my life. Is more than double the distance of the marathon. So just over 60 miles, 62 I think is the official distance of the 100 kilometers, so a lot of new ground, new territory to explore, but we are now only 79 days out from the race. It is starting to feel a lot more real. The nerves are definitely starting to creep up, so I thought I'd do another video just updating you on how training's going and go through some of the things that I've learned along the way, as well as some of the concerns I still have for the race. Training actually so far has been going really well. I'll knock on wood here just to make sure I don't jinx myself, but although I'm certainly nervous just because of how unknown and how new this race and this distance is going to be for me, and although I have no prior experience with anything like this, I am 100% confident not only in my coach, but also in the guy that I'm running the race with. My friend from actually my high school cross country team, Todd, him and I are going to be taking on the race together, and that's the first thing that I wanted to tackle in today's Friday 5, is just how beneficial and meaningful it is to have people in this, or a part of this journey with me. I'll start with the coach first. Obviously, like I said, I have no experience with this race distance, no experience with ultra running or long distance trail running at all, and so it has been so beneficial for me to have someone in my corner who has that experience, and not only has that experience, but has the ability to share some of his skills and expertise with me. So although, like I said, I am completely lost when it comes to training for this kind of thing, I have the utmost confidence in my coach and my training program. And I'll talk about some of the things that we've been doing in terms of training a little bit later in the video. But then also, I can't emphasize how beneficial it is having someone else in this with me. I can't tell you how great it's been, especially when I'm waking up early, especially on the weekends, to get some of those long runs out of the way, when I'm doing 2-a-day workouts, things like that, when I have particularly brutal runs, or even when I have some kind of accomplishment that I want to brag about. I'm always comfortable sharing those with my coaches. Him and I like to go back and forth, but then also having that long-term buddy back from high school, being able to share text message conversations, just talking about what workouts we're doing, how things are going, different things we're trying. We're both totally new to this, so it's fun just kind of keeping everything light and being able to bounce ideas off each other back and forth. So the first thing that's been great going through this is just how awesome it is having people on this journey with me, people that I can rely on, people that I can lean on when things get a little bit tough, and I know that's going to come in handy, especially once it gets down to race day. I'm so happy that I'm going to have someone there with me running the race to hold me accountable, but then also to enjoy the miseries that I'm sure are going to come along during the race, but also celebrate the successes. So can't believe how great it's been having these people on board with me. Number 2, new territory that I'm trying to get into, and also a difficult lesson I've had to learn, is just how serious elevation is when it comes to racing. I have been lucky enough living on Long Island that all of my training has been on flat ground. There is virtually no elevation, especially in my area of Long Island, except for the occasional landfill that you can run up, but there's no kind of significant elevation, anything like what I'm going to experience in Bandera. And I knew that was a concern going into the race. So I'm trying to get some elevation experience when I can and work on strength training, something that my coach is helping me with. But what I've quickly learned is when I am able to get out on the trails, I've only been able to do it a couple times, and actually was able to get a pretty significantly long run done up in the mountains in upstate New York. And it was just such a humbling experience, and really just taught me how seriously you have to take elevation on race day, and how quickly elevation can beat you down if you handle it poorly, if you're not ready for it, if you don't respect the impact that it's going to have on you. For my birthday this year, I actually drove upstate and did a 12-mile, I think it was about 12-mile long run up in the mountains, went over 3 peaks. So again, not crazy significant elevation, but definitely a lot more than what I'm used to here, and I think pretty comparable to what's going to be faced at Bandera. And I went out way too hard going up the first hill. I was doing some tempo running and things like that, and so I was trying to push myself, expecting that, oh, I'll just push myself and then use the rest period to relax, and just did not expect how much of a toll that push was going to take out of my body, especially pushing on the uphills, trying to scramble over rocks, things like that, just trying to sprint that uphill. It was hot. I had not necessarily prepared myself fully for the workout as much as I should have, which I'll talk about in point number 3, but I just could not believe how just totally and completely exhausted I was after summiting that first peak. Started to feel it, but especially that second and third, I was drained. I was exhausted. I was actually nervous for a point how far away I was from my car, and just feeling my heartbeat in my brain, in my ears, in my feet, like just feeling that everywhere. I was definitely had overexerted myself, had not prepared for it, was not ready for how hot it was going to be, and just a very humbling experience. So something that I know I have to learn to respect, especially before race day, but also really need to prepare for and get some more training in. So elevation has been a huge eye-opener for me in this training process, and so definitely one of the things that I'm a little bit nervous about, but also know that I'll be able to train for. Number 3, I mentioned in the last one how underprepared I was for that long trail run that I did earlier this year, and part of that was just how underprepared I was to handle fueling. And something that I have definitely had to learn the hard way is just how much more intricate and nuanced fueling is for these trail runs, especially these long distance trail runs when you're dealing with a lot of elevation. Coming from a flat ground running background, I just was unaware of how much more energy, how many more calories I was going to burn through on that kind of run, how much more water I was going to go through, and unfortunately found myself in a pretty difficult situation because, again, I mentioned where I had gotten basically to the halfway point, so I was as far away from my car as I possibly could be, hadn't seen anyone on the trail since I started. It was brutally hot. I could tell that I had overexerted myself. My heart rate had spiked up to like high 170s, 180 at some points, and I was burning through my water a lot more quickly than I thought I would be. So I had a moment where I definitely started to feel a little bit nervous about where I was, but again, luckily having like a hiking background and things like that, I knew that like survival-wise, I wasn't really necessarily at risk. It was certainly a squirrely situation, but I had enough water and everything. There was water around also if things got really desperate, but just a very eye-opening moment that had gone into this run very confident and just brought that back down to zero. And I think that was a really necessary experience for me to go through, just again as a reminder that this is a totally new thing that I'm going through. I need to give it the respect that it deserves, and I've been spending a lot more time since then focusing on the calories that I'm taking in, how much water I am bringing with me on my run, training myself to make sure that like I'm not only just taking water when I feel I'm thirsty, or again, sometimes I'd occasionally push myself to like the brink on flat ground when it's a little bit safer of an environment, so that I can kind of work on testing my limits as far as how far I can push myself on how little water, things like that, and knowing that that definitely is not an option in this type of race, if that makes sense, and that I really just need to start focusing on perfecting that hydration plan, perfecting that fueling plan, so that I can utilize the pack that I'm going to have with me to the most efficiently, as well as utilizing those aid stations. Luckily at Bandera, the aid stations are pretty close together. I think the longest one is there's about 6 miles between aid stations. So worst case scenario, I mean, it's pretty close. You can hobble from one to the other. I actually had a guy reach out gave me a little bit of a confidence boost because he's run the race before, and just reached out to me to kind of go over some tips and tricks, and was talking about how nice it is having the aid stations relatively close together. So that'll definitely be a benefit, but that's a strategy I really need to work on and really need to perfect before I toe the line on race day. Before I move on to the next point, I also just want to stop to pause for a minute to mention, like I said, that guy who did reach out to me to give me some advice and some tips, didn't reach out to him at all, wasn't necessarily looking for advice per se. He just happened to see my past video about me signing up for my first ultramarathon, shot me an email on Gmail just offering his advice, his expertise, and I can't tell you how meaningful that was to me, but also how helpful the information was. I definitely plan on hopefully communicating him, corresponding with him a little bit more back and forth, just because, like I said, this being totally new, having someone with experience not only with this type of race, but this specific race, so I can know what kind of things as a beginner I need to be aware of, will be immensely beneficial. Even just his initial email going over aid stations, some like quick tips to things to be aware of, really the most important information you need to be aware of headed into the race. that really got to me right at the perfect point where I am starting to get definitely nervous about the race. Like I said, I have the confidence, but those nerves are starting to creep up a little bit, and that immediately gave me a nice confidence boost, just knowing again that that's another person in my corner who's willing to lend advice before the race, but I'm sure will be a great resource once we get down to Bandera for race day. So can't wait to meet him in person, but definitely appreciate the advice. And also just reaching out, if anyone else has any tips, tricks, anything like that, please let me know. I'm always open to feedback. This is something that's totally new to me, and am certainly willing to learn. And with that, let's jump into number 4. Another thing that I had somewhat considered but have very quickly realized just how many questions I have is knowing what type of gear I'm going to need for this style race. So again, coming from a road race background, there's a whole new level of gear and items that you need to take on a trail race, especially one of this length where most likely we're going to be starting early in the morning and not finishing until after dark. So since the race is going to be run in Texas, that means a lot of different climates, things that I've never had to worry about before during races, like sun protection, heat protection, and then at night running with a headlamp, making sure that I'm carrying fuel and things like that with me, trekking poles. There's so many other variables and gear items that what kind of things are a personal preference, what are necessities. That's just something that I'm starting to go through. I've been working with my coach a lot to kind of try to narrow some of those things down, but I've also realized I need to start reaching out to people who have experience with these races so that I can get some information on what type of gear, what exactly am I going to need for race day, what things should I be looking to test. I've got the hydration pack, got some trail shoe options that I'm starting to consider, since that's going to be, those are, I would say, like the bare essentials. But really need to start thinking about, like, okay, during the heat of the day, do I need to wear something that's going to protect my skin? I'm very fair skinned, so sunburn is a real concern. Sunscreen, what kind of options are best for, like, something that's not going to be me completely covered in grease. Just little things that you need to think about, or little things that you might not think about going into this type of race that I need to start considering. So I think I had not necessarily worried as much about that early on, but as I'm starting to put together my race kit and realizing there are so many gear items that I am just totally lost when it comes to trying to navigate. So looking forward to diving into that world, because I'm definitely a little bit of a gearhead, and just interested to see what all is out there as I start to assemble my race day package. The 5th and final thing that I've been learning along the way, and probably one of the coolest things to see as I've been going through training for this race, is just how much your body, and specifically your legs, can handle when you really put them to the test. I remember early on in this training cycle, I luckily, again, knock on wood to make sure that I don't jinx myself, haven't had to deal too much with any real significant injuries. There's been twinges here and there, like a slight hamstring strain. I had some pain in my shins early on in the year, but luckily so far everything's been going really well. And I do remember, especially, it was the pain in my hamstring that was starting to creep up. It seemed like it was getting worse. I couldn't really figure out what was causing it, couldn't really figure out a good way to relieve the pain except for resting and not running. A lot of conversations with my coach on how to tweak my training, tweak my running, things like that, to try to alleviate some of that stress. And while I was going through this, I was reading Scott Jurek's book, North, which, if you're not familiar, is about his story trying to break the fastest known time on the Appalachian Trail. And early on in his journey, he experienced a pretty significant hamstring injury and was worried that this was going to take him out of immediately, like floor his attempt so early. And I remember him talking about how devastating it was, him just hobbling through these days, trying to log these miles, just in so much pain. And there was a turning point where someone who had experience on the trail kind of came to him and said, "You'll be amazed at like how your body can adapt. This pain is letting you know that like your body wants to stop, but obviously it wants to stop. You're going to push yourself as fast as you can across the entire Appalachian Trail. That's not something that a person's body necessarily wants to do. But once your body realizes that you're not going to stop, it will start to adapt itself to kind of heal itself while allowing you to continue to push yourself." So again, I think this is tricky territory, so I want to be careful about how I word this, just because I'm not saying you should push yourself through every single injury. But I do think sometimes there are, like with me with this hamstring thing, where I could run. It wasn't necessarily painful running. There was some stiffness afterwards, but running didn't necessarily seem to be making it worse, as long as I wasn't pushing myself too hard or pushing myself past my limits. And just after reading that part of the book and watching him start to recover, that mental change in me, the pain started to alleviate in my legs. I was able to tweak my training and things like that. And I think a lot of times it's very easy for us to dial back because we think there's something that we can't do. And you just need someone either reminding you or something demonstrating to you that sometimes you can push past those limits and realize these new limits that you can set for yourself. So I hope that makes sense. I feel like it was rambling a little bit, but through training for this race, this is easily the hardest training I've ever done in my life, with the tempo running, the intervals, the distance, etc. This is more running than I've ever done. I'm already, I think, 200 miles past where I was for all of 2018. So obviously, like, my mileage is up, my speed is up, my legs are going through a lot. And even with like 2-a-day workouts and things like that, learning to run on tired legs, as you continue to push yourself, it's just so rewarding seeing how your limits just continue to extend, especially early on in running. There's just so much more that you can achieve, and that kind of rate of improvement is so quick, that exponential improvement early on. So that's something that I'm in the middle of. It's been really cool to see and really cool to learn along the way, and I just can't wait to see how it all pays off in January. With 79 days left, there is still so much to do to make sure that I am prepared for this race, but also still a lot of time to put the work in to make sure that I am as prepared as I can be on race day. So it has just been such an incredible experience. I can't promote enough. If there's a new distance you're considering, a new style of race, a new experience, just go for it. The best way that you can learn and improve and just grow as an individual is to just jump head first into these opportunities. There was a lot of back and forth with my friend that I'm running this race with. We had kind of talked about how we wanted to do our first ultra, but weren't sure. We wanted to get our feet wet and not sure where to start. And I found Bandera 100K and was just adamant we should just do it. This should be our first ultra. And he was like, you know, maybe we should do a 50K first. Maybe we should branch into this. But ultimately, we said, you know what, if we're going to do it, let's go big. It's going to be harder, obviously, than training for a 50K. It's double the distance, and still all of the other variables of this being our first trail race, but we have the time to do it. We have the effort. We have the commitment to put the training in that we need. And so just, you know what, taking the jump, and we'll see what happens once January comes. But again, I'm just so confident in the process, and confident that both of us are going to get across that finish line come January. So just cannot wait for the race. Wanted to say thank you again to everyone who's reached out so far along the way with just any helpful tips, tricks, or even just words of confidence. It definitely helps calm some of those nerves that I'm starting to feel, but just really appreciate all of the outreach from all of you. Looking forward to race day. Again, only 79 days away. I can't believe it. I know it's going to be here before I know it, but just even though I'm a little nervous, overall just incredibly excited for the opportunity and can't wait. So with that, congratulations as always on making it through another week. Happy Friday. I hope you have a phenomenal weekend, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.